Technological innovations can bring about unexpected and irreversible changes that forever disrupt culture and society. Every school child is taught how the printing press brought about the Protestant Reformation, but other innovations have been just as revolutionary. I will argue that the loudspeaker was one of these inventions, as they enabled the rise of fascism in 1930s Germany, and they continue to serve populist politicians such as Donald J. Trump, as well as megastars such as Taylor Swift. I will argue that the humble loudspeaker irrevocably shaped our contemporary world.
Hello and bonjour. Welcome to Anthropologize This, a video series in which I will examine the contemporary world using anthropological principles. I am Michel Bouchard, professor of anthropology at the University of Northern British Columbia in Prince George. I live, work, and play on the traditional and unceded territories of the Lheidli T'enneh Nation. With what was then the new technology of the loudspeaker, Hitler's propaganda enamored and mobilized the German population.
The loudspeaker continues to shape our political landscape. I shall examine the hype over rally size and why Trump is so obsessed with having the biggest of the big rallies. Trump's ego pushes him to assert that he had more people listening to him at his rallies than Martin Luther King, Barack Obama, or any other person past or present. Though he does not realize it, rally size is tied to communitas, the forging of crowd, psychological and social unity, and the subsequent quasi-spiritual transformation of attendees. Trump did make excellent use of rallies in the 2016 election to forge the Make America Great Again, or simply MAGA, political phalanx. But cracks are now appearing. Thus, the reason he was so easily goaded during the September 2024 debate.
First, let me respond as to the rallies. She said people start leaving. People don't go to her rallies. There's no reason to go. And the people that do go, she's bussing them in and paying them to be there and then showing them in a different light. So she can't talk about that. People don't leave my rallies. We have the biggest rallies, the most incredible rallies in the history of politics. That's because people want to take their country back. In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there.
Now, if anything, Trump rallies are turning away followers. The spell that he once had over MAGA followers now seems to be breaking.
But the Washington Post decided to interview attendees as they're leaving early and just ask them, why are you leaving? Journalism, we love to see it. There were complaints about how long they were made to wait, the fact that the sound system was poor and they couldn't hear, the fact that the concession stands were closed and they couldn't get food or water. But this was the quote that got me. Anastasia Bennett was an undecided voter, and she was leaving his rally early, and she was asked why, and she said that it was the insults and how long she had to wait, and that now she is voting for Kamala Harris.
With what was then the new technology of the loudspeaker, Hitler's propaganda enamored and mobilized the German population. The loudspeaker continues to shape our political landscape. Cornelia Epping-Jager, in an article entitled
Hitler's Voice, the Loudspeaker Under National Socialism, argues that the loudspeaker, as a technical medium, framed as an extensively communicative apparatus, was constitutive for National Socialism's political culture. In other words, the loudspeaker enabled the emergence of the Nazis and Hitler as a political force. Hitler understood that speech could be used to create devotion to the cause. And, as he wrote, we want to create a wave of indignation and to send hundreds of speakers amongst the people. What revolutionized this was the development of loudspeakers that would enable tens of thousands of people to hear the well-crafted propaganda speeches of Hitler. By 1932, loudspeakers were used by Nazis in the run-up to the election to reach out to over 10 million people in over 200 mass events, an average of 50,000 per rally.
This would have been unthinkable even a decade earlier. Prior to speakers, the only way to amplify sound was to use physical means, notably cone-shaped acoustic horns to amplify and direct sound. This is evident in both the old gramophones and the original megaphones. Crowds could gather, but it would be physically impossible for such massive throngs to hear what was being said.
Though a mundane object in our era, the loudspeaker came about through numerous technical innovations. First, a microphone was necessary, and David Edward Hughes invented the first modern microphone in the 1870s, which allowed the conversion of sound waves to electrical currents. He never did patent his invention, and Emil Berliner and Thomas Edison would enter into a long legal battle to gain a patent for the microphone. Berliner's microphone would be integrated into the telephone patented by Alexander Graham Bell in 1876, as the latter had bought Berliner's patent for the then large sum of $50,000. Edison was nonetheless awarded the patent in 1892, leaving Berliner quite bitter. However, a microphone on its own is of little use. The telephone did not need a speaker any more than a can held to the ear listening to the sound of a voice transmitted through a taut cord. The amplification of the sound coming from a diaphragm in the conical earpiece was sufficient. To project sound at a greater distance, electrical impulses must be transformed into more powerful sound waves. And in 1898, Oliver Lodge did this with a moving coil loudspeaker. The moving cone recreated the sound transmitted by electrical impulses. To have true loudspeakers, however, what was lacking was a means of amplifying these electrical impulses. In 1906, Lee DeForest invented what came to be known as the vacuum tube that served to amplify an electrical signal. Finally, all the technical innovations necessary for the loudspeaker were in place. These three inventions, the microphone, the moving coil loudspeaker, and the vacuum tube, were combined by Edwin Pridham and Peter Jensen, who experimented with the fabrication of loudspeakers that could project sound for miles in the distance. They founded Magnavox, Latin for great voice. In 1915, their public address system would be showcased at San Francisco's Christmas Eve event, where 100,000 people gathered to hear with great clarity the carols being sung. American President Woodrow Wilson in 1919 used this PA system to address a crowd of 50,000. In 1924, King George V addressed 90,000 attendees of the British Empire exhibition. The Nazis under Joseph Goebbels realized how this new technology could be used to spread Nazi propaganda. Thus, the loudspeaker paired with speech seeking to psychologically manipulate the people could sway vast crowds. Goebbels also had loudspeakers installed around public places so that no one could escape Hitler's speeches and Nazi propaganda. The next step was to bring these speakers into the homes of ordinary Germans. As Alison Marsh writes in Inside the Third Reich's Radio, Goebbels commissioned a stylish radio that could be mass-produced and sold at a discount to German consumers. In 1933, the Volksempfänger radio, featuring radio tubes and a built-in speaker, ensured that Nazi voices could be heard inside German households. The power of the loudspeaker on its own can carry the words, but the fervor is shaped by the assembled crowd. Victor Turner put forward the concept of communitas, the structure that envelopes people who are brought together, stripped of their daily status and rank, and who come to feel great solidarity with all those assembled. This is achieved as they are together fully liminal, which is to say located in the between and the betwixt, where all are equal and the individual's will is surrendered to that of the group. When communitas is achieved, individuals can feel truly unified with all those that surround them. There is no rich, no poor, no high status, no low status, only participants stripped of the markers of their identity. Paired with rhythmic sound and movement, this can lead to a form of altered state of consciousness characterized by phenomena such as hallucinations, hypnotic states, and trance states. This powerful state can be perceived as amplifying cognition as well as disconnecting the mind from the senses. Such experiences can leave an individual transformed, undergoing a psychological and social rebirth. Hitler staged his speeches as a form of coercion to get radicalized converts to the Nazi cause. As Said's survey explains, dogma would be kept to 1 or 2 points. He would speak only in a telling or ordering mode. He would seek to unify the crowd around a commonality which identified a threat to the group. He would seek to stir anger and fear and would use repetition and slogans. The goal was to convince people of the righteousness of the Nazi cause and thus create zealots. These individuals would be transformed and would return to their daily lives carrying the torch of the newfound devotion to a political cause. As you have guessed, parallels could be made to Trump's rally speeches from 2016 and this past year. Though Hitler made nefarious use of Communitas, it can also occur without vicious propaganda tied to it. A case in point would be concerts and other large events. Here, too, with massive crowds, music, and the energy of those assembled, the concert can be transformative in its own right. Though PA speakers were very effective to broadcast one sole voice, or at best a combination of voices, it would take several more decades to perfect speaker systems to allow both the vocalists and the instrumentalists to play together coherently. Nonetheless, in 1969, the Rolling Stones played to a crowd numbering upwards of 500,000 in Hyde Park, London. This was followed a month or so later by the Woodstock Festival with some 400,000 attendees. The latter certainly created a communitas which would mark for decades the participants. And this was with the PA systems which were still in their infancy in the 1960s. The technology would be enhanced throughout the decades, allowing for greatly improved sound quality in concerts. Though Taylor Swift's concerts do not rival the mega events of the 1960s in sheer number, they do host crowds of close to 100,000. Should she ever host a free concert, the crowds would certainly exceed those of Woodstock and the Rolling Stones. But the sound system would certainly surpass those of the latter. Loudspeakers and charismatic personas enabled the rise of populist politicians who, in spite of television and live streaming, continue to hold rallies. Donald Trump, as a case in point, held over 300 rallies in both the primary and election campaigns of 2016. He would attend up to 3 rallies per day, sometimes held in different states, and thus could reach out to over 1 million voters in those heady months to forge MAGA. This movement is often presented as being a cult. There certainly are some elements, and the communitas forged in the rallies, past and present, would play a pivotal role in creating believers who would then go back to their regular lives, as well as social media, and propagate their devotion to Trump and the cause. Anger, fear, and hate are an essential component to Trump's narrative. Also, Trump created Truth Social to seek to control the message. While the Nazis relied on radio, Trump has Fox News. And instead of public speakers and public squares, Trump has social media spreading disinformation, serving the needs of modern propaganda. Now, in 2024, it is Kamala Harris that is gathering large crowds, and Trump's rallies do not have the intensity they had 8 years ago. When there are empty seats, it is a tad bit harder to ensure true communitas. Also, without hypnotic speeches, the crowd's focus will waver and there will not be the needed psychological impact. Thus, the power of Trump risks fading, but others will certainly follow. In later talks, I will examine how new technologies such as the internet and electronic media have in turn shaped social and political life in recent years and decades.
Und im Osten ist der Feind bis zur Linie Lichtenberg, Marsdorf, Karlshorst gelangt.
Mit dem Angriff Steiners wird das alles in Ordnung kommen.